As I made my way downstairs, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, nudging me awake with each step. By the time I reached the bottom, I stretched out, still shaking off the remnants of a deep, restful sleep. "Good morning, everyone," I called out, stepping into the kitchen. On my way past the stove, I leaned in to give my wife, Sarah, a quick kiss on the cheek. "Daddy," my son Ethan squealed, jumping out of his chair and sprinting towards me. That little burst of excitement never got old. At 4 years old, Ethan was full of energy. I scooped him up and twirled him around, despite Sarah's half-amused, half-exasperated look as she tried to get him to focus on his Cheerios. Seeing her stressed face, I quickly set him back down in his chair so he could finish his breakfast. "So, how did you sleep, buddy?" "Good. Freddie came to visit me last night." "Oh, yeah? And how is the great Frederick doing these days?" I asked with a playful tone. "It's Freddie, not Frederick, Dad," Ethan corrected me, stretching out the last syllable as if the name Frederick was utterly ridiculous. "My mistake. How is Freddie doing then?" I replied, making sure to emphasize the name just right. Sarah shot me a warning glance. I knew she was not thrilled about Ethan's new imaginary friend. She did not think it was a good idea to play along, but I could not see the harm in it. I mean, he was only 4 years old. Every kid at that age has an imaginary friend, right? And considering we had just moved into a new house in a different neighborhood, I figured it was his way of adjusting to everything being so unfamiliar. The move to Cedarwood had come out of nowhere. My job had offered me a transfer and a substantial promotion, which was too good to pass up. The downside, though, was that the sudden change left Sarah and Ethan with very little time to get used to our new surroundings. "He's okay," Ethan said, his voice a little quieter. I glanced over at him. "Just okay." "Well, that is a shame. Did good old Freddie have anything interesting to say?" "Not really," Ethan replied, slurping milk off his spoon. "Just stuff." "Just stuff," I repeated with a smile. "Yeah, he said he doesn't like you." I put on a look of mock horror. "No way." "Freddie, how could you? That hurts." I teased Ethan with a light tickle, making him burst into giggles. "Maybe I can meet Freddie at your birthday party next weekend, and he will see I am not such a bad guy after all." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "That is silly, Dad. Freddie cannot come to my party. He is dead." The sound of the spatula clattering onto the stove made me look over at Sarah. We locked eyes, both of us a bit taken aback. I hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Did you just say Freddie is dead?" I asked, turning my attention back to Ethan. "Yep, he has been dead for a long time," he replied, casually shoveling another spoonful of Cheerios into his mouth. "Mom, can I go play in the garden now?" I finished almost a whole bowl. Sarah seemed a little distracted, but she nodded. "Yes, but do not forget to take your bowl to the sink first." "Okay, Mom," Ethan yelled, already halfway to the sink with his half-full bowl. He darted out the back door and into the garden without looking back. I stood there watching him go. "What do you make of that?" I asked Sarah, still a bit puzzled. She shrugged, looking a little uneasy. "I do not know. Kind of creepy, do not you think?" "Yeah, it is. I cannot imagine where he came up with a story like that." "Do you think there is anything to it?" Sarah gave me a withering look. "Are you seriously asking me if our house is haunted and if a ghost is visiting our son? Come on, Mike." "What, you do not believe in ghosts?" "Of course not. That is just a bunch of nonsense. Do not tell me you actually buy into that stuff." I shrugged, pondering for a moment. "I do not know. There is a lot in this universe we do not fully understand. Who is to say there is nothing after we die?" She turned back to the eggs she was cooking. "That is ridiculous, Mike. Anyway, like you have said before, it is just a harmless, imaginary friend, right?" She glanced back at me with a raised eyebrow. "Right," I mumbled, only half paying attention now. My thoughts were elsewhere as I gazed out the window, watching Ethan busy himself in the sandbox. "Maybe I should stay in Ethan's room tonight," I suggested. "You know, just to check things out, make sure there's nothing weird going on, like some stranger sneaking into his room." "Seriously? Don't you think that's a bit much? What harm could it do? It's Friday night. My mom would love to have him for a sleepover. She could let him binge-watch Paw Patrol while spoiling him with popcorn and sugar cookies. Meanwhile, you could take the night off, soak in the tub with a glass of wine, and lose yourself in a good book. She tried to look unimpressed, but I could tell the idea was tempting. "This is ridiculous, you know," she said, not entirely convincingly. "Come on, you cannot deny that a long bath and some quiet time sound pretty amazing." She rolled her eyes, but I knew I had her. "Fine, but if your mom's busy, it's off." As expected, my mom was over the moon to have Ethan for the night. She picked him up early in the evening, and Sarah and I enjoyed a relaxing night with takeout pizza and cheap wine. I sent her off to indulge in her bubble bath while I settled in to watch some ridiculous alien show on the History Channel. By 11 o'clock, I was getting sleepy and ready to call it a night. After changing into my pajamas and brushing my teeth, I announced to Sarah, "I'm off to commune with the spirits," in my best spooky voice. She was already cozy in bed, absorbed in a paperback. "Have fun," she replied absent-mindedly, blowing me a kiss. Leaving the warmth of our bedroom, I headed down the hall to Ethan's room. I flipped on the overhead light and took in the room. The pale blue walls were decorated with a massive clown mural, its wide, toothy grin staring back at me. I shivered. What on earth made Sarah choose a carnival theme for his room? Clowns were creepy, no doubt about it. I walked over to Ethan's little bed, covered with a striped blue comforter. My feet would definitely hang off the end, but I figured I could manage. I crawled into bed and switched off the elephant-shaped lamp. The room was swallowed by darkness, except for the faint glow from a nightlight in the corner, shaped like a big top. The soft red light gave the clown an eerie, almost hellish appearance. How had I not noticed just how unsettling this room could be at night? Turning my back on the creepy clown, I tried to calm my breathing and relax. I was jolted awake from a deep sleep by the sound of creaking. Disoriented, I struggled to remember where I was, trying to make sense of my unfamiliar surroundings. Right. I was in Ethan's room. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, trying to figure out what had woken me up. In the far corner, the closet door was slightly open. Had it not been closed when I went to bed? Ethan's little backpack was swaying gently from where it hung on the doorknob. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Is someone there?" Nothing. I turned my head and my eyes fell on that damn clown again. I really needed to talk to Sarah about getting rid of that thing. The nightlight's eerie red glow was still casting unsettling shadows, making the room feel strange and disorienting. I scanned the room, taking in the pile of stuffed animals in the corner and the bookshelf by the door. "You're not Ethan." The words were so soft, I almost thought I imagined them. My eyes snapped back to the closet. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling as I stared at the dark opening. Silence. I rubbed my eyes again, trying to shake off the growing unease. This was getting ridiculous. Here I was, a grown man, letting myself get spooked in a kid's room, lying in a tiny bed under the watchful gaze of the creepiest clown I had ever seen. I threw the covers off and was about to swing my legs over the side of the bed when I heard it again. "You're not Ethan." I froze. This time there was no mistaking it. Someone or something had spoken. I slowly turned my head back toward the closet, dreading what I might see. In the dim red light, I could make out a small, pale face peeking out from the darkness. Only the top half of the face was visible, large dark eyes staring unblinkingly, a pallid forehead, and a mop of dark hair. The face was at an unnaturally high level, as if some impossibly tall child was standing just behind the closet door. "What the hell? Who are you?" I stammered, my heart racing. The face remained still, the eyes never blinking. "Are you Freddy?" I ventured. The moment I said the name, the face vanished, and I heard a scuffling noise from within the closet. "Where is Ethan?" The voice came again, louder this time, rough and angry, spitting out Ethan's name with a menacing growl. "He's not here," I replied, relieved to hear my voice come out steady this time. "What do you want?" There was a pause, the silence stretching for several seconds. Then the voice returned, softer but still eerie. "Want Ethan?" For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. "You cannot have Ethan," I said firmly, my voice rising in defiance. The room suddenly chilled, the temperature dropping so fast it felt like a freezer. The air seemed to crackle with some unseen force, and every hair on my body stood on end. Before I could react, I noticed movement near the floor of the closet. The white face reappeared, clearer this time from my angle. It was the face of a child, but twisted and wrong. This was no child. The skin was thin and sickly, stretched tightly over sharp bones. The eyes were sunken, almost mummified, with dark rings encircling the black voids where pupils should have been. The lips were bloodless and twisted into a grotesque grin. But the teeth, those jagged, needle-like teeth, were the worst. Each one looked like it had been shattered on purpose, creating a mouthful of razor-sharp shards. The chin rested on the floor, and the face stared up at me with a fury I had never seen on a child. It was pure, undiluted rage. The face held its glare for a few agonizing seconds before the creature began to move. No, it was not moving. It was slithering. Pressing its limbs tightly against its sides, it snaked its way out of the closet, its whispering growing louder, more sinister. "Want Ethan! Want Ethan!" I scrambled back as far as I could, my back hitting the headboard of Ethan's tiny bed. The childlike creature kept coming, its body slipping silently across the floor. Soon its head and shoulders were out of sight, followed by its pale, pointed feet as it continued to glide forward. The creature was now under the bed. I gripped the mattress tightly, my mind racing, unsure of what to do. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and sweat dripped down my forehead. Suddenly, the mattress jolted as if something had grabbed onto the springs from below, making them creak under the weight. I felt the creature's movement, one hand and then the other, until I saw tiny, jagged fingernails curl around the edge of the bed. I had always thought that if faced with a terrifying situation, I would be able to move, to fight or run. But at that moment, I understood what it meant to be paralyzed with fear. My body refused to obey me, leaving me helpless as those ghastly hands gripped the mattress tighter. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to bear the sight any longer, not wanting the image of that horrific mockery of a child seared into my memory. And then I heard it. "John? John, come back to bed. This is ridiculous." The room flooded with light as the overhead fixture clicked on. My muscles finally responded, and I turned my head, opening my eyes to see Sarah standing in the doorway. "John? Are you okay?" I stared at her for a long moment, then whipped my head back to the side of the bed where those hands had just been. There was nothing. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "I am fine," I croaked out. "Everything's fine." She glanced over to where I had been fixated, but seeing nothing, she just continued. "Come back to bed. I cannot sleep without you. It gives me the creeps to sleep alone." With that, she turned and walked out, her robe trailing behind her. I sat there for a full minute, straining to hear any sound. But it was quiet, dead quiet. Cautiously, I lowered one foot to the floor, then the other. As I stood, I half expected to feel a cold, ragged hand clawing at my ankle from under the bed. But nothing happened. I could not bring myself to peek underneath. The thought of locking eyes with that grotesque imitation of a child made my stomach turn. Instead, I turned on my heel, walked out of the room, and firmly shut the door behind me. Back in my own bedroom with Sarah now peacefully asleep beside me, I lay there wide awake for hours, haunted by the image of that child's twisted face. The fear gnawed at me. The fear that I would wake up to find those tiny cold fingers around my throat, and that sinister voice hissing in the darkness. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds, and the sound of birds chirping outside our second-floor window grated on my nerves. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, my mind still wrestling with the events of the night before. There was no way I could let Ethan stay in that room again. Not with whatever that was in there. I had to take action. I had to protect my son. I reached for my laptop, which had been collecting dust under the nightstand for who knows how long. The ancient thing took forever to boot up. When it finally came to life, I opened the browser and started searching. How to get rid of ghosts. The cursor blinked back at me, almost taunting. I quickly erased it and typed DIY exorcism. Nope, that was worse. Cleansing spirits from your house. Better. I hit enter. The results were all over the place, as you would expect, but eventually I found a few sites that gave me something useful. A few hours later, I had a plan, and I had a name: Reginald Ward. So the little bastard really was named Reginald. Turns out, without us knowing, our lovely new home was the site of a tragic death back in 1907. An 8-year-old boy named Reginald Ward had died here from consumption, what we now call tuberculosis. As much as it rattled me to discover that our home had this dark history, what unsettled me even more was the fact that this kid, or whatever was left of him, was still hanging around. I shuddered just thinking about what could have twisted that poor child into the thing I saw last night. My wife Sarah popped her head into the room, snapping me out of my grim thoughts. "What are you up to? You've been in here all morning." Nothing much," I said, quickly closing the laptop to keep her from getting too curious. "Just browsing online." She dragged out an okay and shot me a look like she knew I was up to something. Yeah, she was definitely on to me. I needed to come up with something fast. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "you've been pretty stressed lately. How about I ask my mom to keep Ethan for a few more hours and you can treat yourself to a spa day?" Her eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? I thought you said spa days were the biggest waste of money." She was right. I did think that. Seemed like you were just throwing money away and getting nothing out of it. But I needed her out of the house, and I needed her gone while I tried to deal with this whole ghost situation. "Forget what I said. You deserve it. Go ahead, give them a call." A big grin spread across her face. "You don't have to tell me twice," she shouted as she dashed downstairs to make the call. I forced myself to ignore the thought of how much this was going to cost me and refocused on the task at hand. I figured I had a decent idea of how to handle Reggie. Everything I read online said it was best to do the cleansing at night, but I did not have time to wait. This had to be done now. I quickly called my mom to see if she could keep Ethan until the evening. Once that was settled, I got dressed and headed downstairs. "Babe, I've got to run a few errands. I'll be back soon." "Okay, I'm headed to the spa in about 30 minutes. They had a last-minute cancellation for the deluxe package. Can you believe it?" I mentally cringed at the thought of the bill, but forced a smile. "That's awesome, honey. Enjoy yourself." I grabbed my keys and made a beeline for the car. 45 minutes later, I walked back into the house with my assortment of purchases. Claire's car was gone, so I knew I had the place to myself. Well, not entirely alone. I carried my haul upstairs and pushed open the door to Luke's room. The red curtains were drawn, casting that same eerie glow as the night before. The weather had turned sour, making the day even gloomier, with just enough light slipping through to give the room a dim, unsettling vibe. I felt a shiver run down my spine. After shutting the door behind me, I emptied the contents of the shopping bag onto the floor. I took a moment to assess what I had gathered. A small bundle of sage sticks, apparently called a smudging wand, an abalone shell, a large feather, a container of coarse salt, and a Bible. I pulled out my phone and rechecked the instructions from the article I had been studying earlier. I wanted to be absolutely sure I was doing this right. First, I took the salt and sprinkled a line across the doorway. According to my research, this was supposed to keep the spirit from escaping into the rest of the house during the cleansing. I had no idea if it would actually work, but I was not about to take any chances. Next, I placed the abalone shell on top of the Bible. The Bible was not part of the original instructions, but I figured it could only help. Better safe than sorry. I walked over to the window and pulled back the red curtain. The rain was really coming down now, adding to the room's already creepy atmosphere. I cracked the window open just a bit, enough to give the spirit a way out, but not enough to soak the floor with rainwater. Satisfied, I pulled a small lighter from my pocket and flicked it on. The tiny flame flickered in the dim light of the room. I carefully lit the end of the smudge wand, watching as the red embers glowed. I quickly blew out the open flame, leaving the stick to smolder, releasing a fragrant, earthy smoke. I dropped the smudge wand into the abalone shell and picked it up, holding the Bible in one hand and the large feather in the other. I was as ready as I would ever be. I started to move around the room, using the feather to waft the smoke, letting it fill the space with that thick, earthy scent. I made 3 slow circles around the room, keeping quiet as I moved. On the third pass, I stopped and spoke. Reginald Ward, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. You are not welcome here, and you must leave. I paused, listening to the silence that followed. Nothing seemed to change. I kept at it. Reginald Ward, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. You are not welcome here, and you must go. Still, there was no immediate reaction. I resumed my pacing. Reginald Ward, in the name of God, I command you to leave. At first, it felt like nothing had changed. Then slowly, I began to notice something different. The rain had stopped. It was as though the room had been enveloped in a thick, cottony silence. The air felt dense, almost as if I were underwater. My heartbeat quickened, and a sense of unease settled over me. Reggie, in the name of God, I command you to leave. Just as I spoke the word leave, I heard a distinct thump from the closet. I stopped pacing and fixed my gaze on the slightly ajar door. The darkness inside the closet seemed even more impenetrable. I resumed my chanting, not taking my eyes off the closet. Reggie, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. Another thump echoed, followed by a faint hissing sound, like breath escaping through clenched teeth. The hissing grew louder, accompanied by a deep, dragging scratch. Reggie, I command you in the name of God to leave. You are not welcome here. The hissing intensified. From the murky depths of the closet, a small, moaning voice began to emerge. Don't touch! The word was drawn out, rasping and sinister. Reggie, you must leave now, I shouted toward the closet. Don't touch! The voice was louder now, hissing with a breathy rasp. 2 small gray hands began to emerge from the darkness, grasping onto the doorframe. My name was spoken in a sibilant whisper that made my skin crawl. John! The way it hissed my name made my blood run cold. John, don't... I refused to stop. Reginald Ward, in the name of God, I command you to flee this house. The small gray face emerged fully now, revealing dark, wary eyes. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for the creature, but that quickly faded. I took a deep breath and spoke again, more softly this time. Reggie, you must leave. Smoke began to curl up from the gray hands as though some intense internal fire was seething beneath the surface. The entity seemed unable to speak now, only emitting a harsh, hissing noise. I watched with a mix of dread and fascination as the creature's hands fell to the ground. The sharp nails left gouges in the wooden floor as it laboriously dragged itself forward, out of the closet's darkness. The storm's light cast a pallid glow on its mottled gray skin, which rippled as smoke drifted lazily from it. The entity lifted its large black eyes towards me, its gaze pleading. Don't! Before I could respond, the smoke engulfed the creature, swirling around it. It flowed silently through the slightly open window. I stood there paralyzed until my knees finally buckled. I hadn't realized how much the ordeal had drained me. I wiped the sweat from my brow and glanced around at the now empty closet. It was over. Despite the chaos of the past 24 hours, knowing that Luke was safe was a comfort. I took a long sip of the sweet wine and sank deeper into the plush sofa. The doorbell rang, and before I could even set down my glass, I heard Luke's excited footsteps racing down the hallway. Dad, Mom! Luke burst into the living room, leaping into our arms. We laughed and hugged him tightly as he chattered about his day at Grandma's. He spoke so quickly that I could only catch snippets, but from what I gathered, they'd had a blast. Baking cookies, playing games, and indulging in a mountain of junk food. My mom entered the room at a more measured pace. Whoa, Luke, give them a break, she chided, trying to calm him down. I'm going to go see Reggie. I can't wait to show him the new puzzle Grandma got me, Luke shouted, already bounding up the stairs, his excitement palpable. Before I could say a word, he was gone, his giggles echoing up the staircase. My mom settled into the chair next to the couch where Claire and I were still lounging. He could not stop talking about his friend Reggie all weekend, she remarked, shaking her head with a smile. Well, I have a feeling we won't need to worry about Reggie anymore, I said, trying to sound casual. Claire gave me a curious sideways glance, but I ignored it, focusing on my mother. It was the strangest thing, though. my mother continued, her tone thoughtful. When I asked him about Reggie, he said Reggie was dead. I know, Claire said, her voice tinged with unease. It's rather unsettling, isn't it? Yes, my mom agreed. But then he told me Reggie was his friend and that Reggie protected him from the others. My heart skipped a beat. The others? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, my mother confirmed. He said the others lived in the attic and were mean. They tried to come down and hurt Luke, but Reggie kept them away. When I asked him more about it, he wouldn't say anything else. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The others? The rasping voice of Reggie echoed in my mind. Want Luke. Want Luke. The realization hit me like a freight train. Reggie hadn't wanted Luke. He was trying to warn me about the others. Reggie had been trying to protect my son. He had tried to scare me away, to help me understand the danger that lurked. I set my wine glass down abruptly, the clink of glass against the table snapping me into action. I grabbed the blanket from my lap and bolted toward the stairs. Just then, the piercing sound of my son's screams filled the house. I froze for a split second, my heart pounding in my chest. The blood drained from my face as I sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Luke! I shouted, my voice trembling as I reached the top of the stairs. I threw open the door to his room. The sight that greeted me froze me in place. The room was dark, save for the dim light filtering through the closed curtains. Luke was standing in the middle of the room, his face pale with terror, tears streaming down his cheeks. In the corner of the room, near the attic entrance, I saw a shadowy figure, its form indistinguishable but clearly menacing. It moved toward Luke, its presence cold and menacing. Get away from him, I roared, stepping into the room. The figure hesitated, then slowly receded back towards the dark corner. I could barely make out the shadow of what appeared to be clawed hands reaching out, but it was too dark to see clearly. The cold presence in the room seemed to grow heavier. Claire appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. What's happening? She asked, her voice filled with fear. There's something in here, I said, my voice firm despite the terror clawing at my insides. It's not Reggie, it's the others. I reached out to Luke, pulling him into my arms. It's okay, buddy. We're going to get you out of here. I turned to Claire, who had quickly joined us. We need to get him downstairs. We have to leave the house now. Claire nodded, her face set with determination. We hurriedly guided Luke out of the room, my heart racing as I kept glancing over my shoulder. The dark presence seemed to loom, but it didn't advance. We made it down the stairs and out of the house, my mother following close behind. As we reached the front yard, I looked back at the house, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I don't know what that was, I said, clutching Luke tightly, but we're not staying here. My mom and Claire nodded in agreement. We needed to get far away from that place. Whatever was in that house, whatever it was that had been lurking in the attic, it wasn't done with us yet. As we drove away from the house, the weight of the experience settled over me. We were safe for now, but the fear of what we had encountered lingered. I glanced back one last time, hoping that the house with all its dark secrets would be left behind us for good.